Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Here's our second video of the day. Today we're going to be talking about Ixalan previews, and Wizards have dropped a lot of previews on us today. Now, all those leaks that came out a couple months ago, they did confirm those, and I'm going to do a separate video to talk about those because there's a whole bunch of cards, close to 50 in there. We can finally read them clearly, so I wanted to go over them one last time to make sure everyone was on the same page as to what's coming out. However, they also previewed some new cards and also talked about the mechanics of the set a little bit, so I wanted to do a shorter video now that goes over those. Now, quickly, before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to support us, one of which is our link to Flipside Gaming site, where you'll find a promo code for a discount. There's also Amazon links for products down there. Any purchases in any of those places, a percentage will come back to help us out. And then finally, you'll have our Patreon page linked below as well. With that out of the way, let's get into the big news for today. Alright, so let's get started with the big card that you just saw on the title screen there. Jace, Cunning Castaway, 2 blue and 1 legendary Planeswalker Jace. We'll talk more about that in a second. This is a mythic, of course, 3 loyalty, +1. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player this turn, draw a card, then discard a card. -2, create a 2/2 blue illusion creature token with, when this creature becomes the target of a spell, sack it. -5, create 2 tokens that are copies of Jace, Cunning Castaway, except they're not legendary. Alright, so let's talk about that legendary Planeswalker clause first. This is something a lot of people have been speculating on because when the sheet was leaked a couple months ago, you couldn't really read this card, but you could make out that this was a legendary Planeswalker. So it got people thinking. Wizards did confirm that all Planeswalkers, once this set is dropped, will retroactively become legendary Planeswalker. So what does that mean? Well, basically means that the Planeswalker uniqueness rule as we know it is going away, and they're going to be treated more like the legendary creature rule or the legendary card rule. So in other words, I can't have 2 Jace, Cunning Castaways in play on my side of the battlefield at the same time. So just like you know the rules today, if I played a second one, I would have to sacrifice one of them. However, the big difference is I can have a different Jace on the battlefield. So I could have Jace, Cunning Castaway and Jace the Mind Sculptor, for example, and that would be just fine. There'd be no issue with that. They can both coexist on my side of the battlefield. That is new. One thing I should point out, though, even though this is legendary, it's technically not a legendary creature, so this can't be your commander. So you can't start using these Planeswalkers as commanders unless they state on the card specifically that they can be commanders, like the Commander 2014 commanders. So that's the big difference, and it is going to definitely create some upheaval, I'm sure, in the secondary market as people scramble to look for ways to interact in different ways with Planeswalkers now that they're legendary. But enough of that. Let's talk about this card. This is a 3 casting cost Planeswalker. I like cheap Planeswalkers. Sometimes they get a bad rap because people will look at them and say, oh, it doesn't feel like the abilities are all that explosive. And no, they're not going to be. Not for 3 mana. You're not going to get explosive abilities. That's just not a balanced card. But for 3 mana, what a cheap Planeswalker really should do for you is give you some incremental advantage. It should pull your opponent's attention off of you and your other board state for a while to deal with this thing, and they kind of have to deal with this thing. We'll talk more about that in a second. If they don't, they could be in trouble. So at the very least, it lets you keep going with your game plan while your opponent's distracted with this Planeswalker in a lot of cases, and if nothing else, it takes some damage off of you onto it, maybe some other spells and resources off of your board state onto it. Sometimes that's just good enough, right? So what does this thing actually do on its own, though? Well, that +1 is intriguing. I like to loot. Now, I do have to get combat damage across to a player to loot. I can still plus it and not loot, of course, but if I want to get that loot, which I do, I want to be probably in a creature-heavy deck, which is going to make sense, of course, for Ixalan, which is very tribal-centric. So it kind of makes sense here. This is going to be better, obviously, if you have a lot of creatures and ways to get damage across in combat. The -2 ability, this one's interesting. I like the flavor behind it because Jace is always creating illusions. This is a card that he actually does this now. And you get a 2/2. It doesn't have evasion or anything, but it is a tad fragile, because if it becomes the target of a spell, you do have to sacrifice it. So you can't target it with your own stuff to buff it or anything like that. And more importantly, your opponent can target it with even a combat trick and get rid of it. However, notice it doesn't say spell or ability. Usually illusions in the past will say if it's targeted by a spell or ability, sacrifice it. It takes away ability, making it a little more sturdy, and your opponent's actually going to have to burn a card to deal with it. I like that a lot better, actually. So this -2, even though it doesn't feel like it's super game-changing, is actually pretty decent, I think. And the -5 is very intriguing to me because you can get there fast, and that's the key with some of these small planeswalkers. And even if you pay the 5 loyalty and this only has 5 loyalty, you get rid of this copy, but you get 2 more copies, so it's doubling itself basically, or replacing itself and giving you another one. And what that's going to do eventually, if your opponent can't deal with these extra copies, they're going to start falling behind real quick, giving you the ability to loot, to make more of these illusions. It could get kind of crazy, actually, if your opponent doesn't have answers. So, yes, it is a card that can be answered maybe relatively easily in some board states, but at the same time, I think it's taking your opponent's focus off your game plan, and it's giving you a little bit of incremental advantage here and there, and that's good enough for me for 3 mana. I think it's a fine card. Potentially could see some standard play. Definitely a bomb in limited. All right, let's move on to Prosperous Pirates. This is a blue and 4 human pirate 3/4. It's a common. When this enters the battlefield, create 2 colorless treasure artifact tokens with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So think clue tokens, but a little bit simpler. These don't cost any mana or anything. They show up, you can tap them, sacrifice them, you get a mana of any color added to your mana pool. And we got these kind of accidentally previewed last week by Wizards. They posted an article a little too soon, and we did a video on that last week, so you can check that out. But we got a sneak peek at what those tokens look like. They actually look pretty sweet. So Prosperous Pirates itself, though, really good card for limited purposes. In fact, I would say relatively high draft pick. Here's what I like about it. For 5 mana, I get a 3/4. Okay, that's not super exciting, but those 2 treasure tokens that are going to allow me to color fix and maybe cast a second creature that turn, that feels like a pretty good swing in a game of draft or even sealed. So I'm really happy with that just on its own. Or I can just simply wait another turn and ramp into something a little bit bigger. So it feels like a fine card for limited purposes. As for standard, I don't really see this doing too much there. I feel like there's probably better ways in this set to ramp, and there's definitely some better ways in previous sets. So it feels like it's a little expensive for what it's trying to do in that scenario. But like I said, I'm happy to play this in limited. Dead Eye Tormentor. This is a black and 2 human pirate 2/2 with raid, and whenever this enters the battlefield, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. So the raid mechanic is back, and I actually like that mechanic for a couple reasons. First off, it encourages action. I'm all about that. I like when they make mechanics that encourage attacking, encourage action to happen. Secondly, this is a great mechanic to teach new players really how to play the game properly, because most of the time, depending on board state and the situation, it's best to cast your spells, your creatures especially, on the second main phase. Well, this is a mechanic that really drives that point home to new players, so I think that's a very smart mechanic. The card itself, I'm not super excited about. I mean, it's just a common. I don't like paying 3 for 2/2s. Maybe I'm a little spoiled. I like to pay 2 for my 2/2s. And the fact that, yes, I do get the potential raid ability of forcing a target opponent to discard a card out of this card, but I don't know. Sometimes it's going to be fine, sometimes it's not. If it's too early in the game, which you kind of want to play this early in the game for it to be effective on the battlefield, then your opponent probably has a land or something they can throw away, and it's not going to hurt them too much. Later in the game, they might not even have any cards in their hands. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's definitely a curve filler if you need it, but I'm probably going to skip this one in sealed or draft a lot of the time. Sun-Crowned Hunters. Well, here's a dinosaur. 2 red and 4 with Enrage. This is another common 5/4, and whenever this is dealt damage, it deals 3 damage to target opponent. Again, I like this Enrage mechanic a lot. It's another mechanic that is moving the games along, and that's actually pretty cool. Now, there's a few ways this can trigger. Obviously, in combat, if you attack with this and they chump block it, you still get to do 3 damage to a target opponent. That's pretty sweet. I do want to point out, though, if they block with 2 creatures, as long as one doesn't have first strike or anything like that, The damage will happen at the same time, so this will only trigger once. So keep that in mind. This won't trigger twice if it's blocked with 2 creatures normally. Other than that, there's other things you can do with it, like maybe ping it yourself to do the damage. And size-wise, this particular card actually feels pretty good as a 5/4. So a 5/4 for 6, again, in sealed and draft, and it has this enrage ability. I'm pretty happy to play it. Maybe it's not like first, second pick for me in a draft, but it could be a relatively mid to high pick. I like the size of the card for the casting cost. Unfriendly Fire. This one costs a red and 4. It's an instant, another common. Unfriendly Fire deals 4 damage to target creature or player. Okay, so I want to point this out first, and a lot of people are going to look at this and say, whatever happened to Lightning Bolt? Whatever happened to Lightning Strike? Whatever happened to a bunch of burn cards that are more efficient than this one? Yes, those cards are good cards. If they were printed in the set, they'd probably be uncommon or rare, or maybe even mythic, who knows. But this is a common, so you have to kind of adjust expectations. This is really meant to be, again, a draft and sealed card, and it's good in those formats. I'd be happy to pick this, probably even first pickable in draft, quite honestly, in a lot of packs. 5 casting cost instant, 4 damage to a creature or player. It's going to deal with a lot of creatures out there. It can even put away opponent late game, and there's going to be enough of these floating around that you could get lucky and grab 2 of them. Yeah, it feels like it's going to be good in that format. Not something I'm probably looking to play in standard. There's going to be better options, no doubt, but again, strong and limited. Next, we have Tishana's Wayfinder. This is a green and 2 Merfolk Scout 2/2. When this enters the battlefield, it explores. Of course, this is a new mechanic. Reveal the top card of your library. Put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Then put the card either on the top of your library or in your graveyard. So, okay, I actually really like this mechanic. I'll talk about the card first. 2/2 for 3, again, not thrilled with that, but sometimes it'll be a 3/3, and when it's not a 3/3, you're going to get to draw a land card, and I'm actually okay with that. So this feels very, very playable in both draft and sealed. Don't know, again, if it's a first, second, third pick necessarily, but could be a relatively mid to high pick for me, and I'd feel pretty good with it. If I'm in green and this comes around late, I'd be very happy. So yeah, the card feels decent there. As far as standard goes, I don't know if it will quite get there. Again, there's probably going to be better things you can do in the 3 spot, and probably better cards with Explorer on them, so I don't know if it gets there, but definitely another card that feels good in limited formats. Now, the mechanic itself, I just want to flesh out. I'm excited about it because it's potentially card draw, and when it's not card draw, you do get some sort of benefit. In this case, it's a +1/+1 counter. It looks like that's probably going to be what it always is, I think, from what I've heard so far and from what I've seen. I don't think we're going to see other things than a +1/+1 counter, but I guess we'll wait until the whole set's revealed. But aside from that, the card, if it's not a land, I get to decide whether it stays on top or goes in the graveyard. It feels kind of like a quasi-scry, but in some ways maybe even better if you care about what's in your graveyard for some reason. So that's actually pretty sweet. So I'm really excited to see how deep they go with this mechanic as we see more cards. Sleek Schooner. This one costs 3. Guess what? It's a vehicle. They are back. 4/3, crew 1. This one's an uncommon. Happy to see vehicles making a return. Makes me feel like maybe they're going to become more evergreen in the future. And I do like them just generally as cards, so that's pretty sweet. And I'm looking forward to seeing what other boats, pirate ships that we get out of this set. Now, the card itself, is it going to replace any of the big artifacts from Kaladesh, Aether Revolt, and Standard? No, it's not, but that's not what it's for. This is an uncommon that's really meant for, again, draft and sealed play, and I think it's going to be just fine there. Again, in draft, it's probably not a real high pick, but maybe a mid to high pick. A 4/3 for 3 with a crew 1 feels economical enough for me to be happy with it. Transform is also back, and this is actually pretty cool. This time around, the second side of the card is going to be a land. It appears that's going to be the case for all of them. And I really like the card frame on the backside of these cards, the land side. They look actually really cool from judging from this one. So let's look at the card itself. Treasure Map, it costs 2. It's an artifact, it's rare. Pay 1, tap, scry 1, put a landmark counter on this. Then, if there are 3 or more landmark counters on it, remove the counters, transform this, and create 3 colorless treasure artifact tokens. And on the other side, you get Treasure Cove. It's a land, and you can tap it for colorless mana, or you can tap, sacrifice a treasure, and draw a card. This is actually pretty sweet. It reminds me a little bit of the card draw spell that we saw in Amonkhet, where you were building onto it with the brick counters. And to me, that was a real good limited card. I feel like this is going to be the same. As a matter of fact, this is a cheaper starter cost with only 2 and then 1 to activate. So you scry a few times and then eventually you turn those resources into either ramp or color fixing and or some card advantage. And I think that's actually pretty sweet. It's a little slow, obviously. You do have to tap, sacrifice a treasure, draw the card, and this will transform already in the tap state. So keep that in mind. It won't be till next turn that you'll get the card draw. But at the same time, I think it's still pretty decent. A little slow, but it's still card draw, and I'm happy to try it out for sure. Again, it's one of those cards I don't think I'm necessarily first picking in most packs, but it could be another mid to high pick for me. I'd like to try this one out and just see how it plays and how efficient it is. Now, with that being said, those are the new cards for today from Ixalan, and this is still not the official first week of previews. That starts next Monday, so I don't know if we're going to get a whole lot of new cards this week beyond these. If we do, I will report them out to you, of course, but I will be doing a video later covering the cards that were now confirmed from the leak, and there's quite a few of them, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.